And you mentioned earlier about holiness. And of course, there is a universal call to holiness, and it's not just for priests and it's not just for nuns, it's for all of us. For each individual, there's a call to holiness. It's not just a call to goodness, but a call to holiness. So, what does holiness look like?
Holiness looks like many, many, many things. It's uniquely personal, and if you look at the history of the saints, I mean, if you want to know holiness, you look to the saints. The reason they're saints is because they lived holiness, and no two saints were ever the same. Every saint was completely different. If you think of any of the great Dominican saints, Saint Dominic, Saint Thomas Aquinas, Saint Martin de Porres, Saint Catherine of Siena, completely different. Or even take some more contemporary saints, Mother Teresa, Padre Pio, John Paul II. Completely different personalities, but what they all had in common was holiness, their love for the Lord, and how the Lord radiated out through them. So holiness looks completely different for every person, but yet what they all have in common is that love for the Lord. One analogy that's kind of helpful is if you think of a stained glass window, in a church, when you see a window with all the different colours, and the more the light shines through it, the more the colours become what they were intended to be. The more yellow will become yellow, and the more red will become red, and so forth. So too with us, our vocation in life, whatever vocation that may be. And I don't mean vocation just to be a priest or a religious vocation in the world. Whatever the Lord created you to be, the more you allow the light of Christ to shine through you, well, the more your personality will shine like stained glass windows. And that's what you see in the lives of the saints, that they were all completely different, and they all shone brightly with the light of Christ shining through them. So it was Christ is what they had in common, but yet their personalities were uniquely different. And again, this goes back to this is where the image of the mystical body breaks down. The image of a body breaks down, because in a body, everything's everything's one. Everything is subordinate to one thing, But in the mystical body of Christ, the more you allow Christ to shine through you, paradoxically, the more unique you are as a person, Right. So it's kind of it sounds like a contradiction, but the more united you are onto the body of Christ, and the more you allow yourself to flourish as a member of Christ's mystical body, well, then the more your own unique personality is stamped, it shines out, And again, if you find it hard to understand, well, let's just look at the lives of the saints and see it in them, how they all had their own unique character, their own unique personality, and were completely different from each other, but yet what they had in common was the light of Christ shining through them. And it's the common misperception is that giving your life to Christ, becoming a holy person, makes you a dull and unattractive person. And again, it's a complete lie. It's the opposite. It's the truth. Look at the lives of the saints. They were by no means dull or boring, but they radiated, and people were attracted to them. And that's the vocation of every Christian, to allow Christ to shine through us. But what that looks like for each person will be completely different.
That's interesting, because I suppose, as you said there, it is a paradox. And when we give our lives away, that's when we really live them. I suppose we're all on a search for happiness, whether we're living the Christian life or whether we're not. We're all on a search for happiness. And I suppose all the things that we do, and the sins that we commit, and all the things that we do that hurt us, we're doing them because ultimately we're trying to be happy. We're not trying to be evil, and we think happiness is here or happiness is there. But I suppose if God created us, then He knows us, and so only by like us giving our lives to Him, it's how He can, He can show us exactly who He designed us to be, and then it makes sense that that's when we'd be our happiest, and it's when we're at our best, really. Because I'm just thinking as a husband, when I give my life to Christ, and that's what makes me the best husband and the most attractive. I don't mean visually attractive, but I mean It's true, the Christian marriage it's when I'm more loving and when I'm serving Maura versus when I'm sitting back and just following my own desires and my own wants and my own needs. And that's when the best of me comes true, and I suppose, like, regarding vocations then and the differences between them, as a married person, I'm not called to pray like a priest because I could be neglecting my family and doing just that. Is that a danger we can fall into at times, saying, well, that saint did this, and so I better do it too?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a really important point, that not only does the life of holiness look different for each person, but how it's applied will also be different. And you have to be prudent that you take the necessary steps fit into your state in life. So whatever you can do. So while one person may be able to do an hours of adoration every day, that may not be practical for another person, and it may not be wise or prudent for another person. So if you're married with a young family, well, your vocation lies in looking for them, and you need to be prudent in how you do that. But I like the way you linked it in with happiness, because as Saint Augustine put it so famously, we were made by you, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you. So we were created by God and we're ordered back to God, and it's only in God that we find happiness in the true sense. And this is, even before the coming of Christ, the ancient Greeks had worked out, that happiness is what drives the human person, that every choice we make in this life, everything we do, all our actions, they're all motivated by what will take us a step closer to happiness. Now, sometimes we're deceived and we look for happiness in the wrong places, but ultimately nobody deliberately chooses the wrong thing. Everyone is looking for happiness, and when Jesus came along, then his very first sermon, the Sermon on the Mount, his teaching is on happiness. The Beatitudes, happy are the poor in spirit. But what Jesus does here is he completely flips things around. That all the things we might naturally expect to make us bring happiness, all the things from the worldly perspective, he reverses the order. That it's not fame and fortune and money and celebrity status and all that, but rather happy are the poor, happy are the meek, the humble. That it's really in humility that we find happiness, that in giving that we receive. So while the worldly perspective is to go out and grasp as much as you can and make yourself happy, all the fleeting pleasures of the world, our Christian faith says no, that you find happiness in service, of giving of yourself. And the more challenging that call is, the more fulfillment you'll find. So to be a priest, to be a husband, to be a father, that as you give of yourself, that's where you find happiness.
Okay, and that's very interesting actually, because it's a reminder to us, and to me anyway, that those that are maybe not living a life of faith or living away from the church, perhaps sometimes we can fall into a trap of getting a bit judgmental of how they live. But we really do have to realize that they're just searching for happiness, and we've been blessed to be able to find out where the happiness is, but they're yet to find that, and that's the joy and love that we have to try to show them.
And that's why I think if we get our priorities right, if we begin with love of God, that'll flow into love of neighbor, because our love for God will want to share that gift with others. So if we begin with love of neighbor, as the social justice movement does, and just look at happiness from a worldly perspective without God, it's doomed to fail. But if we begin with God, then we'll have that compassion in the true sense. Compassion, by the way, it's an interesting word, because I think it's been watered down so much in contemporary language. But compassion, it literally translates as to suffer with. Passion is to suffer. So compassion, to suffer with. So when we see people making bad choices, and when we see people been duped by so many false happinesses, that we should have that compassion to suffer with them, and to want to give them the joy of faith. Yes,
because it can be quite easy to judge.
Yeah, and we don't do it in a patronising way, like, oh, look at them, they're making such a mess of their lives. But rather, we do it with compassion. We suffer with them, and we all know, because we all sin in our own way too, and we all have made bad choices. So we know what it's like to to make bad decisions or to take bad turns or whatever. So we can identify with people, and again, it's another paradox. We see it in the lives of the saints, that as people grow in holiness, they become more aware, they become more attentive to the sufferings of others, that they don't become self-righteous, or they don't become proud in their holiness. If they do, it's not genuine holiness. But those who genuinely grow in their friendship with God, they have that sincere compassion for other people, not a false compassion, but a real compassion that makes them want to share the gift of faith.
Yeah.
There's also a line I love to quote from C.S. Lewis, and just on the theme of happiness. He says that if you see if we can get this right, he says, if you aim for happiness in heaven, you'll find happiness on earth thrown in. But if you aim for happiness on earth, you end up with neither.
Wow, that's powerful.
Yeah, I mean, basically what he's saying is that if you're looking at things from from the eternal perspective, if your desires for heaven, if that's what you're working towards, love of God, you'll also find happiness on earth. You'll find joy thrown in here in this life. But if you're only looking for happiness on earth, not only are you in danger of missing happiness in heaven, but you're also unlikely to find happiness on earth as well, So that's where we find happiness, by keeping our eyes fixed on heaven and ordering our love towards God, and allowing that in turn to flow into love of neighbour, whilst bringing joy here on this earth.
If you liked what you just saw and would like to see the full interview, click on the Watch More box above, or else click on the link in the description box below. Make sure to also click on the subscribe button above so as to receive more regular content. Thank you.